You've been blind to it for years. Her rebellion doesn't roar. It whispers in the silence you dismiss. Imagine a volcanic fury contained beneath the calm facade of every woman you know. She smiles, she laughs, she nods, yet behind that poised mask, there's a tremor in her spirit, a simmering revolt that men too often mistake for demure acquiescence. Consider the moment she retreats into quiet. You think she's simply gone inside her head. But in that stillness, she's raising a silent banner of defiance. Each pause in conversation, each subtle withdrawal from your gaze is her way of building an invisible fortress. And you men everywhere overlook the greatest danger. You underestimate the power of a woman's quiet uprising until it's too late. Nietzsche ripped the veil from our perceptions when he called out the will to power in every human soul. He didn't just speak of the overt, thunderous struggles. He pointed to the more insidious conflict brewing in soft voices and hidden corners. He warned that to ignore the gentle insurgence of women is to invite a reckoning that, when unleashed, can shatter your complacency. Now let's step into the paradox that hides in plain sight. You watch her at dinner, poised and polite the way women have been trained to appear agreeable. Yet beneath each polite nod, there's a tension line, a fracture in the porcelain mask, where her true self strains against the expectations you've unknowingly imposed. It's as if she's walking a tightrope woven from social norms, her arms outstretched in silence to maintain balance. And you marvel at her elegance, blind to the storm contained within that hush. Picture a vast moonlit lake, so still it mirrors the sky without a single ripple. Now imagine that same lake, harboring a school of firefish swimming just beneath the surface. In the daylight, you see only placid water, no hint of flame or motion. But in the dark, the firefish glow their rebellious light, carving patterns of rebellion that defy the image of serenity. That image is women's rebellion, invisible by design, luminous only when you know where to look. Here lies the haunting paradox. The quieter she becomes, the louder her rebellion grows. The paradox isn't in a roar or a rally. It's in the silence you mistake for peace. Every hush is a rehearsal of resistance, every pause a vow never spoken. You feel at ease when she retreats into herself because you've been conditioned to equate quiet with compliance. You think, she's fine, she's happy. But have you ever wondered why her silence sometimes feels like an accusation? Have you ever wondered why she smiles with her eyes, but her lips stay still? Why a whisper from her carries more weight than a shout? Why women who learn to mask their anger in calm voices end up forging the strongest alliances in secret? It's because rebellion doesn't always require banner-waving mobs. Sometimes it takes the form of a withheld word, a withheld gaze, an emotion stored and refined like steel in a forge. Consider the image of a cathedral built from glass. In full sun, each pane sparkles in uniform brilliance. From the outside, the structure seems perfect. No cracks, no stains. But on the inside, you discover a mosaic of fractures, each fissure a testament to pressure applied over time. Those cracks are filled with irony, beauty born from struggle, rebellion carved into every transparent wall. Women build cathedrals of quiet strength, and in that sacred space they rehearse their uprising. It's a paradox that men of every culture unwittingly uphold. You've been taught and perhaps even believed that real power demands volume, that revolt must break through the silence in a storm of noise. But Nietzsche cautioned against underestimating the will to power when it lurks beneath restraint. He observed that the most transformative forces might operate in shadows beyond the reach of conventional detection, and when those forces finally break free, they shatter complacency with a force you never anticipated. Your complacency is the problem. By ignoring the subtle signals, the way she closes a book just before bedtime, the way her shoulders drop when you enter a room, you miss the blueprint of her rebellion. You mistake her self-care for disinterest, her boundaries for indifference. The great question you must ask yourself in that silence is this: have you ever wondered why the quietest voices often carry the sharpest truths? And so the paradox reveals itself. Silence is not absence. It's an echo chamber of unspoken demands, a rehearsal hall for the next act of defiance. In the hush, women gather their courage, refine their arguments, and summon the strength to stand against centuries of expectation. What you perceive as calm is in fact the gathering of storms that will one day reshuffle the landscape of your assumptions. You remember Claire, don't you? The woman who breezed into the quarterly board meeting 2 years ago, her heart pounding like a prisoner's drum, yet her voice steady enough to freeze air. You watched her as she presented the numbers, revenues up, costs down, projections optimistic. You applauded her poise. But what you didn't see was the tremor in her gut, the fear that every syllable would betray the doubts she harbored about a culture that rewarded aggression over empathy. You thought she was unflappable. Yet beneath her calm exterior, she was plotting a rebellion. Claire had spent years in the margins absorbing the offhand comments about her soft leadership style. She memorized the stereotypes women were too emotional, too cautious, too polite to lead under pressure. Each microaggression was a grain of sand in a glass slipper, sharp enough to cut, small enough to ignore until your foot bled. You never noticed the bruises hidden behind her tailored blazer. You thought compliance suited her. But in the quiet of her apartment, she catalogued every slight, every undermining remark and vowed that if she couldn't change the culture, she would expose its flaws. One evening you found yourself at the launch party for the new software suite her team had developed. The champagne flutes glittered under the chandeliers, executives mingled in costly suits, and you, along with everyone else, praised Claire for her smooth management. But when she excused herself from the conversation, you saw her retreat to a darkened balcony. You followed curious. She stood alone, city lights swirling beneath her, and you heard her whisper to herself, "They won't know what hit them." In that moment, you realized her rebellion wasn't a sudden outburst. It was a slow-burning fuse she'd lit long ago. Over the next 6 months, Claire assembled an unlikely coalition. She reached out to every woman in the department, junior analysts, mid-level project leads, even the receptionist who'd once overheard a senior VP dismiss budget requests as women's whining. One by one, they shared their stories. The missed promotions, the mansplained advice, the off-color jokes. Each narrative was a brick in the wall they were building together. You watched from afar, as their whispered conversations in the break room evolved into lunchtime strategy sessions. You mistook their hushed tones for gossip. You failed to notice the blueprint unfolding. Then came the day of the town hall meeting. Claire stepped onto the podium with that same serene smile, but this time she held no spreadsheets. She spoke of empathy-driven leadership, of metrics that measured well-being alongside profit, of the stark data, showing that teams led by women outperformed their peers by 27%. You shifted in your seat as she cited Deloitte's research on inclusive cultures. You felt the floor tilt beneath you when she revealed the internal survey in which 68% of employees, women and men alike, felt unheard. Her words didn't shout. They struck with surgical precision. You realized too late that a rebellion had been orchestrated in silence. In the aftermath, you saw board members scrambling to adapt. Policies were rewritten, diversity targets, revised leadership training, overhauled. The very culture that had dismissed Claire's quiet strength was now scrambling to institutionalize it. And as you watched the executive team applaud her, you felt a pang of something you couldn't name. Was it guilt or fear? You recognized that her rebellion forged in secrecy had shattered the glass cathedral you'd mistaken for stability. Reflect on how Claire's uprising resonates in your own world. Perhaps it wasn't a corporate boardroom, but a family dinner, where a sister finally voiced her boundaries. Maybe it was a friend group, where a colleague refused to tolerate offhand sexist remarks. In each case, the rebellion began not with a shout, but a refusal to remain silent. You've seen how the smallest defiance can ripple outward, reshaping landscapes you once thought immovable. And deep down, you know the true power of women's rebellion lies in its silence, in the shared glances and secret plans that swell into voices no longer containable. Now, ask yourself, when have you brushed aside a quiet sign of resistance? How many potential Claire-like rebellions have you overlooked simply because they weren't loud enough? Their stories are waiting to be told, their quiet strength waiting to upend your assumptions. And in that hush, the revolution has already begun. The moment Claire's revolt crystallized the undercurrents of psychology and biology that have shaped women's silent rebellion all along revealed themselves. As Nietzsche proclaimed, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." And yet he also warned that the most powerful weapon of a woman is that which consists in her silence. It's in that stillness where the most dangerous transformations begin. Consider Carl Jung's insight. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. In women, centuries of social conditioning have embedded certain patterns deep in the unconscious ideas of dutiful compliance, emotional moderation, and the quiet acceptance of male authority. These patterns, once conscious, can become tools of defiance. When she withdraws into silence, she's not retreating. She's forging a new self-awareness, excavating the unconscious narratives about her worth and power. Viktor Frankl's wisdom echoes here too. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Biological studies show that under chronic stress, such as the daily microaggressions women often endure, cortisol levels spike, driving fight or flight responses. But fight or flight isn't the only option. There's also freeze, a state of stillness, where the mind shifts into hypervigilance. That freeze response is what you mistake for calm acquiescence. In reality, she's gathering data, monitoring the room, cataloging each slight, calibrating the moment to strike with maximum impact. Socially, women have been relegated to relational roles, peacemakers, caregivers, guardians of harmony. But this expectation has a paradoxical effect. Research in social psychology, e.g. Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, indicates that when individuals habitually suppress their anger to maintain social bonds, they often experience a rebound effect. The suppressed emotion intensifies until it can no longer be contained. In a study by Dr. Elaine Johnson, 2018, women who reported higher levels of workplace silencing experienced a 42% increase in engagement with covert resistance strategies, everything from subtle sabotage to coalition building behind closed doors. That study underscores that silence is not absence. It is stored energy waiting for release. From a cultural standpoint, the archetype of the silent woman has been perpetuated by myths and folklore. Eurydice's quiet sacrifice, Ophelia's tragic muteness, Penelope's weaving through endless nights. Each story frames her silence as passive endurance. But through the lens of modern psychology, we see Penelope not as waiting for Odysseus, but as orchestrating her own narrative, delaying any resolution until she chose the moment. That's rebellion in its purest form, subtle, strategic, and utterly transformative. Neurologically, studies reveal that when women engage in covert planning under stress, the prefrontal cortex responsible for executive function and long-term strategizing lights up more intensely than in men during overt conflict scenarios. Smith et al., 2020. This means that while men may default to direct confrontation, women's brains often default to silent appraisal, long-term planning, and alliance building. You misinterpret that as hesitation or timidity, when in fact, it's the neural architecture of stealth power in action. Nietzsche's notion of the will to power transcends brute force. It encompasses the capacity to transform oneself and one's environment through subtle influence. When women harness the will to power, they don't always roar, they whisper, they persist, and they endure. Jung would argue that this process is an individuation journey, the conscious integration of shadow aspects, those qualities deemed unacceptable by society. In silence, women peer into the shadow, claim their anger, and transmute it into purpose. On the social biology front, the phenomenon of relational aggression has been studied extensively in adolescent girls, but applies equally to adult women operating in hierarchies. Unlike physical aggression, relational aggression operates through exclusion, rumor, and manipulation of social bonds. It thrives in silence. When you see a woman smile while another is subtly ostracized, you witness relational aggression at work, a rebellion against a perceived threat to her status or integrity carried out without a single raised voice. Scientific literature also highlights the importance of emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish fine shades of emotion. Women on average demonstrate higher emotional granularity, allowing them to name and navigate complex feelings like indignation, betrayal, or bitterness. This precision enables a more targeted rebellion. She can withhold a specific word, a particular glance, or a nuanced emotion, crafting her defiance with surgical care. The social consequences of ignoring these psychological mechanisms are stark. Organizations that overlook women's silent signals often face sudden exoduses of talent, covert sabotage, or the mobilization of underground networks that undermine official initiatives. Families that dismiss a daughter's quiet resentment may face her estrangement, and friend groups that ignore whispered concerns may fracture without warning. By integrating Nietzsche's will to power Jung's journey toward consciousness, Frankl's call to self-transformation, and contemporary neuroscience and social psychology, you understand that women's rebellion is multi-layered. It's a symphony of biological adaptation, psychological resilience, and social strategy played out in whispers, glances, and calculated pauses. And because it unfolds in silence, it catches you off guard. So when you next see a woman withdraw, remember she's not fading away. She's spring-loading her power, preparing to unleash a force that will reshape the world in ways you never anticipated. By dismissing women's silent rebellions, you set the stage for devastating fallout both for organizations and personal relationships. In corporate corridors, when women's complaints of bias ring hollow, trust erodes. A recent Harvard Business Review study of over 2,000 employees found that reports made by women were significantly less likely to result in corrective action, fueling a perception that speaking up is pointless and driving women out the door. Consider the tip of the iceberg effect in workplace bullying. In one Irish study, 60% of targets contemplated leaving their roles, though only 15% actually quit. The remaining 45% stayed simmering with resentment that sabotaged collaboration and stifled innovation. In your own teams, you may have seen top female performers grow quiet, withdraw input, and eventually transfer or resign, sometimes en masse. The silence you interpret as contentment is often a prelude to disengagement. According to Catalyst, nearly half of high-potential women consider leaving their organizations within 3 years, citing unchecked microaggressions as a primary driver of dissatisfaction. That hidden churn comes at a steep cost: lost expertise, institutional memory, and the financial burden of recruiting replacements runs into millions annually. Outside the office, silence carries its own shadows. In relationships, a partner who retreats into quiet after a boundary is crossed may not be fine. She may be cataloguing betrayals, preparing to sever ties without fanfare. You might chalk it up to moodiness or stress, never realizing that her silence is a final revolt, a bridge you won't cross until it's too late. Friend groups aren't immune. When a woman declines invitations or grows distant, you think she's busy or disinterested. But beneath that withdrawal, she may be processing repeated slights, offhand comments about her appearance, jokes about her intelligence, or patterns of exclusion. These unspoken injuries accumulate, fracturing trust. When the group splinters, you're surprised by the exodus, blind to the silent meetings she held with confidants, the covert plans hatched to create alternative social circles where her voice would matter. The broader social consequences are equally chilling. Communities that overlook women's quiet dissent miss out on insights that could avert crises. During the 2017-2018 NHS public health debate in the UK, female practitioners' early quiet warnings about patient care policies went unheeded, leading to systemic failures in several trusts. Those covert signals, had they been heeded, might have prevented loss of life and public confidence. Silence can also magnify the impact of injustice. When women hesitate to report harassment for fear of being dismissed, it emboldens perpetrators and poisons cultures. Studies show that only 1 in 4 women report sexual harassment at work. The majority endure it silently. That silence, perpetuates a cycle where violations continue unchecked, undermining morale and safety. The unseen consequences compound: reduced retention, fractured relationships, missed opportunities, and emboldened misconduct. In every sphere, work, love, friendship, society, women's silent rebellions carry warning flares you can't afford to ignore. Their hushed power threatens complacent structures and compels transformation. If you continue to mistake silence for compliance, you risk the quiet collapse of the very systems you depend on. Dưới đây là bằng theo đúng cấu trúc, giữ nguyên tuyệt đối nội dung trong cột 1 và nhóm các đoạn ngắn lại, để mỗi ô có độ dài từ 100 đến 500 ký tự. Silence can be a beacon rather than a barrier, a signal with the power to recalibrate your awareness and rewrite the story before resentment calcifies. When a woman's quiet feels like distance, lean in instead of leaning away, because that hush is her hand extended toward understanding. First, listen for the spaces between words in your next team meeting. Notice how Maria's voice trails off when she begins to speak. Instead of moving on, you pause and ask, "What were you about to say?" And you discover a proposal that reshapes the project's trajectory. That simple act turns silence into a bridge. Second, mirror her boundary when she withdraws from the group chat after comments veer into condescension. Privately message her, "I noticed you stepped back. Can I learn how to make this space safer?" And she shares insights that build a more inclusive culture. Third, amplify her voice in your friendship circle. If you catch Sarah's quiet discomfort over a joke, name it aloud. "I think that felt dismissive." And you give her permission to speak her truth, transforming silent pain into collective growth. Fourth, invite her into co-creation at home. When your partner grows silent over household decisions, say, "I value your view. Let's plan this together." And you turn her withheld input into shared vision, strengthening your bond. Fifth, normalize the pause in every conversation model. The power of intentional silence by waiting 5 seconds before responding. You signal that every voice matters and that no nuance is too small to be heard. Each strategy, each real-life example, workplace, friend group, relationship, reveals how you can turn silence from a wall into a bridge. Embrace silence as a powerful signal. Learn its language, honor its intent, and you will cultivate spaces where women's quiet strength becomes the cornerstone of transformation. Thus you shift from accidental bystander to intentional ally, laying the foundation for a world that listens before it speaks, preparing us all for the seismic change that lies ahead. You've witnessed the hidden blueprint of women's rebellion, the way silence becomes a catalyst for revolution, how every unspoken word carries the weight of centuries, and how beneath the veneer of calm lies a force that reshapes companies, communities, and intimate bonds. The ultimate truth: quiet is not weakness. It is the still point at the center of the storm, where resolve crystallizes and power gathers like water behind a dam. When women harness their silence, they forge alliances, craft strategies, and dismantle outdated paradigms without firing a single shot. That revelation should send a chill down your spine. The most transformative revolutions are whispered, not shouted. Now, when you encounter a moment of hush, whether in the boardroom, at the dinner table, or among friends, remember that it may be the birthplace of change. Women's quiet speaks volumes, and your role is to listen, to lean in, and to act. By honoring that silence, you become part of a movement that elevates unheard voices, bridges divides, and builds a future where every woman's strength is recognized and celebrated. If this insight resonated with you, join the conversation, comment below, with the first time you noticed silence as a signal rather than an absence. Share this video to amplify the subtle power women wield in every sphere. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for more deep dives into the unseen forces that shape our world. And if you're ready to be an ally who listens before speaking, follow us on social media for daily reflections on power psychology and the quiet revolutions unfolding around us. Women's rebellion isn't coming. It's already here, woven into the pauses you've been ignoring. The question is, will you hear it? Engage now, because silence won't wait forever.